They ask, why are we fighting Canada while our children can't afford milk? 2. The media civil war. American media, once the world's storyteller, becomes a weapon turned inward. State-aligned networks warn of Canadian infiltration in daily life. Independent outlets reveal U.S. sabotage operations abroad, igniting outrage. Social media fractures. One camp waving flags, another posting memes about America as the bitter X. The effect is chaos. Truth itself collapses. Every incident, from a factory fire to a school protest, is spun as part of the Canada conflict. 3. Secession whispers. As Washington drains money into global meddling, states begin whispering, what if we left? Texas flirts openly with independence, backed by oil magnates who resent federal weakness. California threatens to align economically with Canada if Washington doesn't stabilize. Smaller states, crushed by poverty, consider coalitions. The U.S. doesn't just face decline. It faces disintegration. 4. The military's breaking point. The armed forces, stretched across proxy wars, begin to fracture too. Young recruits question why they are fighting shadow wars instead of protecting their families. Veterans, disillusioned, form political movements demanding withdrawal. Elite units refuse illegal orders, sparking congressional hearings about mutiny. For the first time since the Civil War, the U.S. military openly debates loyalty to the state. 5. Canada washes. Carefully. Ottawa does not glow. It remembers history. A wounded empire can lash out unpredictably. Canadian leaders urge restraint, avoiding provocations. Trade networks are secured, fortified against sabotage. Diplomats quietly build alliances to manage the possibility of a post-American world. Canada's greatest strength is its patience. While America burns itself from the inside, Canada waits. 6. The turning point. By 2035, America is two nations in spirit, one half clinging desperately to past glory, the other half demanding retreat and renewal. Street clashes erupt between these factions. Bombings hit federal buildings. The word Civil War no longer belongs to history books, it belongs to headline. And through it all, the world washes, wondering not if, but when the United States will finally break apart. Part 16. The Second American Civil War. By 2036, America ceases to be one country in spirit. The fractures deepen until they can no longer be contained. What begins as protests and riots evolves into something darker, the rebirth of war on American soil. 1. The spark. It starts small, as all civil wars do. A standoff in Texas. Federal agents attempt to seize state-controlled oil refineries after the governor announces plans to sell crude directly to Canadian buyers. Shots are fired. Dozens die. The footage spreads like wildfire. Within militias mobilize. Within days, rival states declare they will not obey Washington. Within weeks, America is at war with itself. 2. The sides. The conflict is not North versus South, not even red versus blue. It is far more fragmented. The Federal Union. Washington loyalists, clinging to the flag and the old dream of one America, backed by remnants of the U.S. military corporate elites. The sovereign states. Regions like Texas, Florida, and the Midwest form loose coalitions, prioritizing independence and control of resources. The Pacific Alliance. California, Oregon, Washington, richer, tech-driven states that quietly align trade with Canada and Asia. The People's Militias, grassroots groups, some leftist, some right-wing, all armed, all pursuing their own visions of America. The country becomes a chessboard with too many players, each fighting for a piece of the old empire. 3. Cities become frontlines. New York, Los Angeles, Houston. These cities, once symbols of American power, turn into war zones. Blackouts sweep across regions as power grids are sabotaged. Food riots erupt in urban centers as supply chains collapse. Autonomous militias seize neighborhoods, raising new flags. The United States no longer feels like a single nation. It feels like dozens of small wars stitched together by violence. 4. The outside world moves in. Foreign powers waste no time exploiting the chaos. Canada provides humanitarian aid to border states, deigning loyalty without firing a shot. China quietly arms factions in exchange for influence over ports and rare earth mines. Europe declares the U.S. unstable and freezes cooperation, pivoting further toward Ottawa. The irony is complete. America, once the master of proxy wars, becomes the battlefield for others. 5. The nuclear shadow. The greatest fear is not rifles in the streets, but the nuclear arsenal. Who controls the silos? 10 rogue generals launch. Will factions attempt to seize warheads as bargaining chips? The world holds its breath. For the first time since the Cold War, nuclear countdown scenarios are openly discussed on live television. 6. The end of the Union. By 2037, the The United States is no longer the United States. Maps are redrawn daily. The Pacific Alliance signs trade deals with Canada. The sovereign states create their own currency. Washington still claims authority, but its writ extends little beyond the D.C. barricades. The American flag still flies, but now it flies over fragments, and the world understands a new truth. The empire that once ruled the globe has died, not by invasion, not by conquest, but by its own hand. Part 17: The Rise of the New Order. By 2038, the Second American Civil War burns on, but the world no longer waits. As the U.S. dissolves into warring states, a new order emerges, and at its center is Canada. 1. Canada steps into the void. For decades, Canada was mocked as the quiet neighbor. Now, it becomes the anchor of stability. Diplomatic hub, Ottawa replaces Washington as the center of global negotiation. The United Nations relocates major offices from New York to Toronto. Economic powerhouse. With American markets frozen, nations flock to Canadian trade. The Maple Standard, backed by Canadian energy, minerals, and water reserves, becomes a trusted alternative to the broken dollar. Peacekeeper nation. Canadian forces, trained under NATO, are deployed not as aggressors but as stabilizers. Former U.S. states request Canadian peacekeeping on their soil. Canada doesn't conquer, it absorbs by invitation. 2. The fragmented U.S. states. The former United States no longer functions as a single entity. Instead, the Pacific Alliance formalizes ties with Canada, integrating economically and militarily. The sovereign states struggle with corruption and collapse, some turning into corporate fiefdoms, others begging for international aid. The federal remnant in Washington still shouts about restoring America, but no one listens. The United States becomes a term of nostalgia, not reality. 3. The global shift. With the American empire gone, the balance of power realigns. Europe looks westward, not to D.C., but to Ottawa for transatlantic cooperation. China pushes aggressively into Latin America and Africa but faces Canadian competition for influence. The global South finds Canada more palatable than the old U.S., seeing a nation with power but without arrogance. For the first time in centuries, global leadership is not anchored in empire, but in something quieter: trust. 4. Canada's quiet strengths. The world realizes what made Canada the perfect successor. Immense resources: oil, gas, water, farmland. A reputation for diplomacy instead of domination. Strong institutions that weathered the American collapse without corruption. A culture of patience, where slow strategy outlasted America's impulsive aggression. Canada didn't win by fighting, it won by enduring. 5. America's shadow. Even in collapse, the specter of America looms. Refugees pour into Canada, some welcome, some rejected. Armed American factions raid across the border, forcing Canada to defend itself. The world fears a reunion war, where one U.S. faction attempts to reclaim dominance. But by 2040, it is clear. The United States will never rise again as it once was. The world has moved on. 6. The new Pax Canadiana. Historians later call this the dawn of the Pax Canadiana, the Canadian peace. Global trade stabilizes under Canadian oversight. Former American allies, from Japan to Britain, pledge loyalty to Ottawa. The maple leaf becomes not just a flag, but a global symbol of order after chaos. The irony is complete. The empire that fell created the space for the neighbor it once mocked to lead the world. Part 18: The World After America. By 2050, the world has fully adapted to the new reality. The United States is no more. What remains are fragments, memories, and myths. In its place, a quieter, steadier power has guided humanity into a different kind of future. 1. The former United States, what was once the most powerful nation on Earth, is now a patchwork. The Pacific Federation, California, Oregon, Washington, and parts of Nevada, fully integrated into Canada's orbit. High-tech, green-powered, and globally connected. The Midwestern republics, loosely united, agricultural-based, clinging to a simpler identity but economically dependent on Canadian grain and trade. The Atlantic Free States, New England, New York, and New Jersey, tied closely the Southern Coalition, fragmented, unstable, with corporate-run enclaves and warlord militias. The D.C. remnant, still claiming to be the true United States, but reduced to symbolism, a government in exile ruling little more than its city walls. The dream of a united America exists only in history books. 2. Pax Canadiana. In full, Canada has not become an empire in the traditional sense. It has become something stranger, subtler, global mediator. Every major conflict, from Africa to Asia, sees Canadian diplomats at the table. Economic anchor, The maple standard is the world's reserve currency, backed by Canadian resources and trusted governance. Cultural influence. Canadian values, tolerance, compromise, patience spread across borders, shaping the 21st century's identity. Is not domination. It is leadership through steadiness. 3. The shift in power. The great geopolitical triad of 2050 looks like this. Canada, moral leader, economic stabilizer, global diplomat. China, ambitious, wealthy, but checked by Canadian alliances. The European Union, strong but secondary, tied deeply to Canadian trade. Instead of a single empire dictating terms, the world operates in balance, a multipolar system where Canada is first among equals. 4. Daily life in 2050 for ordinary people. The world feels both more fragile and more hopeful. Energy grids run on renewables pioneered by Canada and the Pacific Federation. Cities from Toronto to Vancouver become global hubs, replacing New York and Los Angeles. Refugees from the old America create vibrant, mixed cultures in Canadian cities. The maple leaf is as recognizable as the stars and stripes once was, but it carries less fear, more trust. 5. The legacy of the U.S. Even broken, America's shadow lingers. Its music, culture, and inventions still influence the world. Former U.S. states keep their own flags, traditions, and stories. Veterans of the Second Civil War tell tales of a time when the world's greatest power destroyed itself. But most importantly, America's fall serves as a warning. Power built on arrogance cannot last. Power built on patience can. 6. The final irony. By mid-century, schoolchildren across the world learn a strange story. The United States, once the greatest empire in history, collapsed by its own hand. Its quite northern neighbor, mocked for centuries as weak, rose to lead the world. And the new order was not defined by conquest, but by cooperation. The story ends with a symbol. The maple leaf flies where the stars and stripes once did, not over an empire of domination, but over a fragile peace the world hopes will last. Epilogue. The 20th century belonged to America. The 21st belongs to Canada. And the 22nd. That is a story yet unwritten.